Oh yeah, that's the good shit. Welcome to Frantoio Grove. Today we're talking about compost. This is a simple way to turn into gold. Alchemy. So compost is how we turn waste products into gold. It's a little bit of alchemy on farm. It's primarily about the biology, about creating biology in the compost and applying it to the field, or in other ways. We can make compost tea, we can make seed treatments out of the compost. We do a couple different types of compost on farm. The primary input for compost is our horse manure. It comes from boarding facilities around us. Oftentimes those places don't have a place to take their waste. They'll even take it to the dump, which is silly. So they bring it here to us for free, and we compost it and turn it into gold. So when we think about compost, one of the things that's really important is to think about how we want to use it, and we can break that down into four main uses. So the first is going to be the fertilizing compost. The primary value of fertilizing compost is going to be the N, P, and K values. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the most common and abundant materials found in the trees, and typically from a agronomic perspective, we want to think about providing those for the trees so they can grow. In a compost form, we want to think about getting our inputs from chicken manure and dairy manure. Typically are very high in NP and K. And those are for when we test our trees and we say, oh, we're low on these nutrients, our soil is low on these nutrients. We can go into the soil and apply this compost, and that'll provide the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to the trees. The next type of compost is more of like a general purpose soil health compost. That's we can call that the nutritional compost, and that's going to be a balance of NPK, some humic substances from the breakdown of organic matter, and that's going to be, feeding the trees. It's also going to be feeding the soil, helping provide more tilth and texture and aeration, and that would be kind of a mixture of maybe some cattle manure, chicken manure. We might have a little bit of horse manure or municipal waste from an arborist or a gardener or something like that. And that's going to be kind of a nice balanced mixture. That's the biggest compost we make here, is our kind of nutritional compost. And then you can have the inoculating compost, which is this is a modified Johnson Sioux type compost. And then we have here our worm bins. Those are good for inoculation, and those are primarily used for the microbes in the compost. All of the compost is all of our compost that we use, we think of as a microbial inoculant, but these two styles are very heavy in microbes, and they're very good for specific targeted applications like seed treatments. We can mix these two types of compost in with our cover crop seeds, and we'll spread those, and then the biology is going to be on the seed, ready to go. So when the seed starts to sprout, it'll be on the roots, it'll be on the leaves, and all that biology is going to be ready to go right when the seeds sprout, providing biological function to the seeds. We can also start to make compost teas out of them, and we can also mix them into our other larger size composts as an inoculant. The last style of compost that we have is the mulching compost, and that's primarily for the soil texture and aeration that it provides. We're going to provide a lot of carbon to the soil, and that's going to be partially broken down in the compost, but then we're going to spread that, and that's going to finish breaking down in the soil, and that's going to provide a lot of food for the microbes, especially the fungi. Really like the high carbon inputs like wood and other mulch from municipal sources or arborists or gardeners. So we're bringing in some wood chips, and we'll be kind of partially composting that and spreading that as partially composted wood chips closer to the winter. So carbon to nitrogen is a really important ratio in creating compost. All things need to be in balance. The most important thing is that the microbes that break down these materials, they are made up of a certain ratio of carbon and nitrogen. So when we have too much nitrogen or too much carbon, they tend to leave an excess of one or the other. So we want about 20 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. If we have way more carbon than that, the microbes just can't eat so much carbon because they're only made of so much carbon. So we want to provide a balance. So 20 to 1 carbon to nitrogen, 15 to 1, 25 to 1 are all about good ratios. And what happens is that if we provide too much carbon, the carbon is kind of like the cooling factor. And so when we provide a lot of carbon, it's going to be a very slow moving compost. It's not going to get very hot temperature wise. And the end result is not going to be fully broken down, so to speak. And then on the flip side is nitrogen. Nitrogen tends to speed things up. It's kind of a stimulant in terms of the compost. And what will happen is it'll burn through all of the carbon really quickly, and we'll have a compost that ends up being hot. When we say hot, we mean chemically hot. There's a lot of nitrogen that we spread that's available still in the compost. It hasn't been broken down. What's going to happen is all that nitrogen that's in a more soluble form is going to feed the microbes, and the microbes are going to have plenty of carbon in the soil and the nitrogen in the compost. And so the microbes in the soil are going to burn through the organic matter in the soil as they process the nitrogen. And that's actually potentially detrimental, as too much nitrogen will deplete the organic matter in your soil. So we want a balance. And so when we have our horse manure tends to be really high in carbon because it's got all the bedding mixed into it. It's a very slow process. We've been composting this for about a year, and we haven't really been actively managing it. So it's going a little slower than we'd like. But even as we start to get a little more active on it, because of the high carbon ratio, it's a very slow process. It's not getting that hot temperature-wise. And so it's never going to fully complete until we actually spread it, and then it has a little more of an opportunity to break down with the atmosphere and the other microbes in the soil eating through it. So we have four different types of inputs. We have a lot of horse manure that's available from the boarding facilities around us, and that's really high in carbon. Horse manure itself is pretty perfect for composting, but it's not super high in nitrogen. And then all of the bedding is typically either hay or cedar chips. And so that increases the carbon and decreases the nitrogen. And that's really great for composting. It's kind of like going to put us in the nutritional mulching compost, kind of right in between those two. And then there's a egg farm near us, so we're getting some chicken manure, and that's really high in nitrogen and really high in phosphorus. And that is going to make a really hot compost. We've been mixing that in with our Johnson Sioux style compost, and then we're going to mix that in a little bit with our windrow style composts. The third is dairy manure. There's a little dairy near us, and we've been getting a little manure from them. That's high in nitrogen, not quite as high as chicken manure, and it's also really high in potassium, which we are typically low in. So that's going to, chicken and dairy manure are both really good at kind of speeding up the compost when we add them to our horse manure. And then the fourth input is sort of like the municipal waste from arborists or gardeners, wood chips, lawn clippings, other stuff like that. Those, depending on the balance of leaves and wood that's getting mixed in with those, that is typically a pretty high carbon ratio input, high carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it's mostly in the form of wood chips, but there is some leaves and some wood, grass clippings mixed in with that. And so that will kind of make in a separate compost pile that will be spread more as wood chips. That'll be our mulching compost. We don't really necessarily want to add that to our horse manure compost because it's already really high with the bedding. So if you added more compost to that, if we added more wood shavings to that, it would just kind of increase the carbon a little further, and that would be a little less useful as a compost. So we're going to compost that separately and applies it more as a mulch. Oxygen is really important in composting because most of the microbes that we use in composting are aerobic. They need oxygen to grow and eat and live. So in most forms of compost, we need to actively aerate the compost. In windrow style composting, which is our main compost pile, we achieve that by just simply turning it. It's a very traditional way of making compost. We go in with a tractor bucket, we lift it and turn it, and we do that every 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on our schedule. And what happens is we will turn it, introduce a bunch of oxygen, and we can keep a temperature probe in it, and we'll see the temperatures rise over time as the oxygen feeds the microbes. They become more active, And then as the oxygen gets depleted, the temperature will start dropping over time, and we'll know that it's time to turn it. There's a couple other ways we can do this. With the Johnson-Su style compost, it's a very passive aeration. It's built in such a way that there's a lot of surface area, and so the oxygen can penetrate in from all areas. And there's only ever about 2 feet of composting material, and so the oxygen can get in to about a foot in depth, and so that's just a passive form of aeration. We've played around with a static aerated compost where there's a fan underneath the compost and it's blowing air through. It's a very technical form of compost that we weren't able to achieve a great success with. It's one of the best ways to make compost as far as quickly converting a pile into a finished product without a lot of agitation. It's able to grow more fungally dominant composts and not have to worry about the agitation breaking up the mycelial structure of the fungi. It's something we plan to explore more as we go. So this is a modified form of a Johnson-Su style compost tower. It's a little bit larger than the traditional style of Johnson-Su compost, and it's made without any landscaping fabric, which is good because it reduces the amount of plastic that we use. And it's made with one center ring that's reinforced with this foundation wire and some chicken wire, and that keeps it really stable. And so we have to worry less about the tubes running through the center collapsing. And so what it is there's a large hole through the center, and then it's about 2 feet thick. And we know that oxygen can penetrate about a foot in either direction. So we're getting oxygen all the way through. And what's great about this is that it just sits here and works. It takes about 12 to 18 months because we're not actively aerating it. So the process is a much slower process, but because it's sitting in a static form, it's capturing all the spores of bacteria, of fungi blowing through. And so it's going to end up with a really diverse set of fungi and bacteria, and also protozoa and other forms of microbial life. Really high diversity because it's so static. We're not breaking up the mycelial structure of the fungi, so we're creating a lot of... it's a very fungal dominated compost, and it's a really great form of creating a slow, statically aerated compost. So this is our first attempt at this modified form. We had done some proper Johnson-Su style compost earlier in the year, and that is made on a pallet. You wrap some chicken wire around some tea stakes, and then that gets wrapped in landscaping fabric, and then you put in some large pieces of PVC pipe while you're building the pile. So that would be a PVC pipe here, a PVC pipe here, PVC pipe here, and then you fill the compost, and then after a couple days you remove the PVC pipes. And we were having troubles with the holes collapsing, and so we found this style where there's just one single hole through the middle. It's a large hole, and it's a little bit larger compost tower than the traditional Johnson-Su. And so this is our first attempt at it. We used this chicken wire and this welded wire. It's not very sturdy, and we had some kind of collapsing down here. This is all buckled. It's still going, it's still working, and obviously it's growing a little bit. This is fine. What we'll do is we'll just kind of clear this every month or so, and that'll just be food for the compost. And while they're growing in the compost, all it's doing is capturing sunlight, turning into sugars, and feeding the microbes with sugar. One of the best foods for microbes is the exudates that come out of the roots. So we're not really that worried about it, and it's all going to end up back in the compost anyways. And then this is our original take. We built that in January. It's coming along. It still has a lot to do. And then this is our next iteration. This is made with the foundation wire and a little bit finer of mesh on the chicken wire. So no plastic from the landscaping fabric. This is a mix of horse manure, chicken manure, and alfalfa. We want to give a really nice, diverse set of feedstock for the microbes. More diversity in the feedstock means more potential diversity in the microbes. These we built about a month month and a half ago, and they're coming along nicely. So the end result of the Johnson Su compost is going to be something that's very clay-like, and we can kind of monitor the progress with just kind of our eyes and ears. And what we can see is there's a lot of wood chips in here, but you can see it's already becoming very clay-like. It's starting to form a mass that will kind of stick to itself. It's a very crumbly texture. This has been going for since sometime in January, so it's about 7 months of work. And we kind of like to come out here and check. We'll check different spots. So moisture is really important in composting. As you can see, this is what our manure looks like when we get it. It's pretty dry. A, the manure has been sitting out, having a lot of time to dry out, and then B, it's mixed in with the bedding, which is a very low moisture product. This is not going to compost. This is a pile that we've been kind of stockpiling. We're getting ready to start this. So we're at some point soon, we're going to get this wet, and then we're going to pile it up. So what our moisture looks like is just kind of a very simple rudimentary product. These lawn sprinklers are a great way to get a lot of coverage along the pile. And we have 3 of these on an irrigation block. So we'll activate these, it'll water this section, and we have them all lined up, and then we'll move them down as the moisture comes up to a certain level. It's a really very simple method of keeping this pile moist. And the top is going to dry out a little bit, but as we get to the center, you can see some of that steam coming out. It's not that moist. It's not super even at getting everything nice and moist. That's why we move them and turn it. It kind of helps balance everything out. This is a nice moist section right here. And so this is what it looks like when we're watering it. And then once it gets up to the right moisture level, we'll kind of let it sit for another month. It'll generally be pretty fine without it. But this is what it starts out as. This is what it ends up as far as managing moisture. Moisture is really important for providing moisture for the microbes. Compost doesn't happen without microbial activity, and we need about 40-50% minimum. 50-60 sometimes is more of an ideal level, and everybody needs water. So this is a nice hot section of the pile. Moisture is pretty good. It's a little low. Being right below the sprayer is actually not the best for moisture. We're going to get a lot of moisture right there and a lot of moisture over here. It's a little dry here, but you can see it's plenty hot. It's cooking along, but you can see all those light colored chips. That's just cedar, and that's going to take a long time to break down. And ultimately, even though it's getting pretty hot in here, all that cedar is not really going to break down until we spread it into the fields. There's just too much carbon in this pile to get a full proper breakdown, and that's okay, because this is going to be kind of a balance between sort of a nutritional compost and a mulching compost. So this is the manure that comes in. The manure itself dries out pretty quickly, and then it's mixed in with all these wood shavings, and that drives the moisture down even further. We've been stockpiling this pile for a couple months. We're getting ready to start this. All this manure is sitting here, and it's not doing anything. There's probably some moisture. It might be 10% moisture by weight, but you can see it's not really doing anything. I could dig into there, and it wouldn't be very hot at all. It's not doing anything just because there's no moisture. So what we'll do is we'll move our sprinkler system over here. We'll give it a few weeks to bring the moisture up. We'll move it a couple times to make sure it's nice and even, and then we'll pile it up to make a large volume to surface area ratio, so all that heat generated by the microbes will get trapped in the pile, and then it's off to the races. So this is our compost. We are just getting started. We have a few different styles, kind of traditional windrow style. We have our Johnson Su modified form. We're just getting started with the worm bins. That's a new thing for us. We're starting pretty small because ultimately we'd like to have piles this big of vermicompost, but the amount of worms required to do that is a lot. So we're starting small and we're going to grow our own worms. And we're interested in a couple other styles like the static aerated compost pile, and anaerobic compost is a really promising compost that's inoculated with lactic acid producing bacteria, saturated with a lot of water and covered with a tarp. And what that does is it's actually able to capture a lot more of the organic matter in the input material. And it happens a lot more quickly without a lot of turning. And so that's a really promising style that we're also going to explore. So as we go, we'll be talking about all of our new compost styles that we take on, and we'll be sharing recipes and directions and plans and everything we have. It'll be on our blog and here in our videos.